Before I start going into the details of the company, I want to introduce Cathal Friel, our chairman, and he'll give a bit of background to where Poolbeg came from and how it spun out of Cathal's other company, Open Orphan. And we'll give a bit of background to the company and the science and the infectious disease assets that we're developing. So Cathal, I'll leave it over to you.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Delighted to be speaking to everybody tonight. Look, Poolbeg Pharma is very simple. It's come out of Open Orphan. Open Orphan's been a Russian doll. We keep opening another, spinning off a company. However, hey, Poolbeg, we have huge aspirations for it. It's a unique business model. There's only one company across Europe similar. That's Evotec in Germany. Again, its origins were in the CRO, and it has a 10x, $7 billion or €7 billion market cap. It came from 4p about 4 years ago to about 45p as of last week. So yeah, it's unique. And that is basically we take a load of products into the clinic and stop in phase 1 and out-license them. In summary, Poolbeg is fully funded. It won't be raising money again because we'll be in an out-licensing deal very, very early on. And any one of the projects coming in, there'll be 5 or 6 in the first 6 months, could be worth quite a few $100 million. So really exciting, and looking forward to seeing what happens out of it over the coming weeks and months. And finally, a bit like any company involved in, it's probably again the most heavily backed listed company. And myself and the colleagues in Open Orphan put a lot of personal cash into Open Orphan. I put a £500,000 into the IPO. Jeremy didn't get an opportunity. He came in just immediately pre-IPO, but don't worry, Jeremy will be contributing and participating. So without further ado, I'm really excited. I know my $500,000 is going to get many multiple uplifts in the weeks and months and years ahead. So without further ado, over to Jeremy and let's see. But yeah, Poolbeg's about to take off.
Great stuff. Thank you, Cathal. So I'll go through my slides. Just a bit of background. As Cathal said, we spun out of Open Orphan. That was on the back of Open Orphan acquiring a viral challenge company, hVIVO, at the beginning of 2020. So just before the pandemic took off. So they've been a great success. And hVIVO had done a lot of viral challenge studies. And what Poolbeg is going to do now is to maximize or to extract some value from the work that hVIVO have done. And that's around therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics, which I will talk through. So again, no better time to be in infectious diseases. We've just launched 2 months ago on the London AIM market with a ticker POLB or POLB. What we brought over, what we acquired, what we inherited from hVIVO and Open Orphan is listed here. So POLB 001 is a small molecule immunomodulator that we are now moving into the clinic next year to test in severe influenza. And this is on the back of work that the hVIVO team had done over many, many years, looking at severe influenza and how the immune system responds to the virus and what's upregulated, what's downregulated. And what happens with severe influenza is that the immune system is overacting, is overreacting to the presence of the virus. This is driven through a protein called P38, and we've got a P38 inhibitor, which I'll talk about later on, but a very exciting program, very exciting project that will move forward. Again, hVIVO has done many, many clinical trials in the flu, influenza space, the RSV, HRV, other viruses, and more recently COVID. And Poolbeg has access to all of this data. So all of your immune responses, all of the blood data, all of the transcriptomics, your genetic data, your protein synthesis. So we've got access to all of that. And we're actually in deep discussions now with AI platform companies to analyze this data, looking for new programs, looking for new targets, looking for new disease drivers that then we can inhibit, bring into the clinic, test very quickly, and then exit through an acquisition or a license deal with pharma. So very excited about this potential of using this AI platform, and I'll talk about that again later on. We have other assets I won't go into detail on, but we've got a predict viral biomarker platform which diagnoses very early in the disease cycle, which patients will develop severe flu, for example, and which patients won't. And then a vaccine discovery platform where, again, analyzing these clinical trial samples, we can identify which parts of the virus show the weakness, are susceptible, or recognized by the immune system. And the best example is the spike protein for COVID. What's the equivalent for other viruses? So we plan to dig a little bit deeper into that. And then lastly, we're looking to actively in-license other assets that we can bring in, we can do some early clinical studies on, and then partner with pharma. We plan to be a partnering engine, providing pharma with all the assets that they need as the world progresses in more influence or more effect in infectious diseases. This is the management team. Cathal introduced himself, a lot of experience in corporate finance, more recently in the pharma space with Amrit Pharma. and with Open Orphan, as he described, which is a great success. Myself, my own background, I'm a scientist by training. I'm almost 20 years in the biotech industry across the USA, working in California, and across Europe for companies in Ireland and in Germany. And again, very excited to be on board with Poolbeg. My last company, Inflazome, was acquired by Roche Pharmaceuticals last year. With a 55 million investment, we were required for 380 million upfront and significant downstream milestones. So again, from that standpoint, this is the industry, the biotech industry. There's a lot of upside when it comes to getting deals done. I'm delighted to be working alongside colleagues Ian O'Connell, as well as Carl as well, who are the co-founders of the company. So I'm happy to come on board, as Cathal said, kind of quite late. But Carl Dunn and Ian O'Connell have done tremendous amount of work to spin this company out of Open Orphan, and again, ready to go. Again, a lot of experience, so terrific team to work with. And we've kind of rounded this out with very experienced, the grey hairs of the industry. Paddy Ash and Eddie Gibson have many years in the biotech and pharma industry, guiding us and advising us. And I think from a scientific standpoint, I just want to flag Luke O'Neill, who's a professor here in Trinity College in Dublin, and world-renowned, world-recognized as an immunologist, and globally in the top 1%. And he's a real, scientific thought leader. So we lock into Luke every time we have a scientific discussion or scientific questions. He's a great help. So a great team to begin with. But as I mentioned, there is no better time to be in infectious diseases. I think it's recognized that back in 2015, the warning signs were there that a pandemic could be coming. It was ignored, and I think much to our own disappointment that was the case. Because look at us now; we're 20 months or so into the pandemic. We've seen what happened with regard to human life, and also with regard to human economics, or the economy is rebuilding right now. But I think there's demand to pharma and to science in general not to let this happen again. So let's look at this. Let's look at what's out there from a product standpoint, and let's build more pipelines. And I think that's the case with pharma. They are looking to companies like Poolbeg to repopulate their pipelines into new exciting infectious disease assets. I think. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, that's perfect. So again, from our standpoint, it's been projected that the market will grow to 250 billion by 2025, and this is across therapeutics, it's across vaccines, and across diagnostics. And of course, Poolbeg plays in all three. But as Cathal said, our plan is not to take it all the way. It's to do important early clinical studies or important early value-adding studies, de-risking studies, and then partner with pharma so they can take it from there. So I think we're excited to be part of that regime. And this slide describes it perfectly. Conventional biotech, they take a lot of money in, they focus on one product, they move it forward to phase 2. They can spend up to 20 million pounds on phase 2 clinical trials, 3 years time frame. And again, at the end of that, you may get ambiguous data that you may have to repeat or go forward again. So we're, again, as I say, very different. The Poolbeg, we take our pharma assets, we've got a very capital light approach, a very quick approach, where we're going to do these early phase 1B or phase 2A. That's early proof of concept, proof of mechanism studies, importantly in human, because that's what pharma like. Again, my previous roles, trying to get preclinical deals done with pharma is challenging. They like to see human data because a lot of preclinical programs fall down from either safety or tox or efficacy. So they want to see the human data. So we plan to play in that space, that narrow space, where we're de-risking programs in infectious disease and then discussing and doing deals with pharma. So the cost is quite light, 2 to 3 million per program to get these early clinical studies, and results are quick. 12 to 18 months, we'll have data out. We'll be discussing with pharma all the way along, and when they see the human data that shows that early proof of mechanism, this is what gets them worked up, what gets them salivating, what gets them wanting to do deals. So we'll be that deal-making engine to talk to pharma. So again, we plan to develop internally and bring in 5 to 6 assets and monetize these using the funds that we raised back in July. And as Cathal said, we don't plan to raise any more because the deal-making environment is so rich right now. So any one deal can generate 700 million. And again, I give Inflazome as the example. We just had phase 1 data, we had 1 patient data, and we were able to be acquired for 380 million upfront with significant downstream milestones to come upon success. So we'll be cash generating from that standpoint. As I say, infectious disease was somewhat ignored for quite a while. Again, people didn't see there was value in it, but of course, post-COVID, now they do. They want to make sure that the science has come along. We've learned a lot from COVID about other viruses, not just COVID. So there's a lot of appetite in pharma to do deals with biotechs and other pharmas to build out their infectious disease pipeline. And a few examples here. As a Reviral, 120 million upfront for it. That was a territory-specific deal. Merck acquired Oncommune for a COVID program for 425 million upfront. And for Lyme disease, again, we're going beyond the traditional, but Lyme disease, Pfizer did a deal of 120 million upfront. So there's money in infectious diseases, you could say. And again, the influenza example I gave, I mentioned 55 million was raised. We exited last year. We were started in 2016, so a 4-year exit, acquired by Roche, as I say, for significant funding. And for us as well, we're looking beyond. And recently, the White House in the US announced that they're going to invest 650 billion into, to avoid and preparing for future pandemics. Again, we plan to play in that space, so we plan to draw down some of that funding as well. We've all learned our lessons from COVID. But what people are realizing right now is from an influenza standpoint, and as I say, our lead program is in that space. And something I learned a few weeks back, a new word for everyone's lexicon is the twindemic, where people are looking at both a pandemic for COVID, and on top of that will be influenza. And it looks like this is what's going to happen. As I say, the warnings are there for this. And if you look on the right-hand side of this slide, the WHO have recently announced that in India, for example, there's a spike. The spike for influenza is coming back. And again, that's the concern. This influenza virus was almost non-existent last year, but it's always incubating. It's in it's incubating in some patients around the world, and gradually comes out when flu season kicks off. So there is a concern that influenza is going to come back, and of course, there's the downstream concerns that will affect many people on top of COVID. So again, we're trying to be a bit better prepared this time around. So I'll speak a little bit about Poolbeg's lead program, POLB 001. So again, there's a major shortage of treatments for severe influenza. As you know, when you get sick, you're in your bed. It's those that go into hospital have the real issue, because there's nothing there for them. So influenza on a normal year affects 1 in 8 people. 5 to 10 million of these are hospitalized, 12 million life-threatening, and there's 500,000 deaths. I think with this, I mean, there was an acceptance previously that this happens. The elderly are succumb, and that's unfortunate. But I think post-COVID, there'll be demands on pharma to come up with better solutions and to decrease these numbers of influenza-associated deaths. There are vaccines out there, but there's a scramble every year to identify, first of all, the strain of influenza, and then secondly, generating the vaccine from that strain. And that it's quite laborious, takes a lot of time, and the efficacy isn't that great, 10 to 60%, on average every year. At different years, of course, but the virus is constantly mutating and avoiding, getting around these vaccines. So that's a concern. But there are influenza drugs out there. Tamiflu is a good example. It once sold over $1 billion a year. But Tamiflu is only effective within 48 hours of symptoms. And I think you recognize a lot of people could try to shake off, they don't recognize it's the flu and try and shake it off. So a lot of people fall out of that 48-hour window, and then there's nothing there for them. So hospitalization follows, and again, severe flu follows that. So there's nothing to help patients in that situation. And this is where our drug, POLB 001, comes in. So the team at hVIVO, I mentioned, identified several years ago that P38 is an immune pathway that's active and upregulated with severe influenza patients. So we have a small molecule inhibitor to block that. And what that blocks is the cytokine storm. The cytokine storm is where your immune system is overreacting. It's going crazy. There's lots of cytokines being produced to try and fight back against the virus. But that has a negative effect of damaging your own tissues, your own blood vessels, etc. So with our molecule, we'll block that and then allow the immune system to calm down and to return back to normal and, as I say, avoid the severe flu. So again, a potential blockbuster here, because influenza is around and it'll always come back every year. So we're planning to be in humans next year with this product. So very excited about this. This is just a quick summary of the product itself, a potential blockbuster. Peak sales, the analysts estimate, is in 250 million range. So it's a phase 2 ready. So this has already been through phase 1, which I think is a key point, a key factor for Poolbeg, is that we're looking to bring in molecules that have been exposed to humans before, have been through phase 1, have demonstrated safety, and then we'll reposition them into infectious diseases. So very excited about that approach. We have worldwide rights for this molecule, this approach, and as I say, it's been safe and well tolerated in humans already. So we're avoiding that very early risky phase 1 step. So we've shown efficacy in influenza studies ex vivo in the lab. So importantly as well, from an IP standpoint, and I think it's fair to say with pharma, they look for safety, they look for efficacy, they look for IP, intellectual property on top of that. So we've got patent protection out to 2038. So again, for severe influenza and P38, we are the go-to customer for that. So looking to move it forward very rapidly into humans and generate the key data that pharma want to review and then convince their management to in-license the program. So we're going to add value, decrease the risk of the programs, and do big deals with pharma. And that's the way we'll extend. We'll drive revenue for Inflazome. And of course, beyond that, cytokine storms happen in many, many other diseases. So we're looking at these diseases as well to potentially take our molecule into other areas. So that'll move forward. I mentioned earlier on, so that's the lead program. The second approach we're taking, I think this is a very unique approach, and it's only Poolbeg can do this, and I'll go through it, but this is using artificial intelligence, using big data and machine learning to look at the immune system response to infections and infectious diseases, and to identify new targets and then new drugs to those targets. So we'll be leaders in this space, and I'll explain why. So hVIVO and Open Orphan have been using these human challenge studies for many years. What that does, they take in healthy volunteers, they take their full workup at day -1 when they're very healthy, and then they look at this is baseline. This is how their immune system are reacting in a normal setting. And then they give them virus. Now, it can be flu, it can be RSV, HRV, COVID studies going on right now, malaria studies are planned. So what you do then is you follow these patients, you take blood samples every day, you take clinical data, immunological data, you look at their digital biomarkers, their heart rate, etc., and you follow them all the way through the disease progression and disease recovery. Obviously, these patients, they always recover. So we've got that huge, large data set that nobody else has. When people present in hospitals, for example, you're able to get a time point when they're sick and very sick, but you can't compare it to what they were like when they weren't sick. So we've got this really unique data set that we're going to mine using AI, and we're in deep discussions with AI companies right now, and we'll see some announcements coming out very soon about that. Again, the news flow will be picking up between now and the end of the year as we gather momentum and gather steam from our IPO just 2 months ago. So very excited about this particular approach. And again, from a description standpoint, the team at hVIVO, we have 300,000 individual samples stored at -80 degrees in 22 freezers. So it's a huge amount of data that we have to analyze, and nobody else has this. So as I said, we have data right now for flu, RSV, and HRV, and then coming down the pike is be malaria and SARS-CoV-2 or COVID, as you know. And again, very excited about that. The plan is to use the AI to analyze these samples and uncover these protective pathways that the virus might use to hide, or pathways that the immune system use to react. And again, we can use molecules and develop drugs, identify drugs that will modulate these pathways, and then use it early clinical testing and drive it forward from an efficacy. And again, partnering thereafter. We don't plan to go beyond our phase 1, phase 2A, these early small clinical trials. We leave it up to pharma. That's their expertise, that's their specialty, to go beyond and run the full phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials and commercialize. This is where pharma do their best, is in the clinical trial setting and commercialization setting, and we leave that up to pharma to work on that. So in summary, as I wrap up, we see a substantial market opportunity here in infectious diseases, expected to grow to 250 billion by 2025, and we'll be in that space front and center with our unique approach and our capital light model. As I said, multiple shots on goal. We'll be looking at multiple programs to bring in and moving them forward. Again, that early clinical data, and if you see signs of efficacy, proof of concept, proof of mechanism, then the value is significant there, and that's where we'll be playing. Our lead program, as I mentioned, POLB 001 for severe influenza. Again, it's a large unmet need, and we know about the pandemic and the return of other pandemics. So we're looking at influenza as a first pass there, but other areas that we can move forward with as well that have cytokine storms. I described the team very briefly, but again, lots of experience, lots of successes across multiple companies. So we plan to do this again. So in brief, in short, a very exciting future lies ahead for Poolbeg, and I'm very excited to be leading it. I have a fantastic team behind me, and I'm looking forward to gaining further momentum and moving forward rapidly into our clinical testing. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
So kicking off, you mentioned the 300,000 samples. Can you confirm who do they belong to? Do they belong to Poolbeg? Disease in Motion, Open Orphan? Could you explain how that works?
Yeah, very good. We have, from a Poolbeg standpoint, when we spun out of Open Orphan, we got a non-exclusive license to access to this data. And again, it goes back to Cathal's vision that separating out Open Orphan, which is now wholly into pharma services and clinical trials, and now Poolbeg will be mining that data on a non-exclusive basis to look, to dive deeper. I guess the disease emotion is for another discussion. That's not part of my expertise or remit, but I think that from our standpoint, diving into the biology, diving into the virology, the immune response, these various biomarkers, we're going to learn a hell of a lot from these studies over the next 12, 24 months. And then, as I say, maximize the value there, looking at new programs, new pathways, new targets to drive them forward. So that's from a Poolbeg standpoint to say it's a non-exclusive right. It's included in the spin-out. We talk about this, that the investors in Open Orphan have got shares in Poolbeg, so it kind of comes over as part of that spin-out. So we're not paying money for it, but it comes as with the shareholding, for example. So we have access to that we plan to monetize. So very, as I say, it's unique. Nobody else has this data set. So we expect to get a lot of value from that data.
Thank you. And just I guess a slightly further clarification, do you pay royalty to Open Orphan for the use of that data? Or are there any other direct commercial relationships between those two firms, yours and
No, as I said, the payment as such are the shares that the Open Orphan shareholders got. So it's a little bit like when we spun out of Open Orphan, there was obviously value that came out of that. So in return for that value, the Open Orphan shareholders got shares in Poolbeg. So it's kind of it's a fully funded. There's no downstream milestones or royalties due to Open Orphan. As I said, the corollary is the increase in share value that we will see from Poolbeg goes back to the Open Orphan shareholders.
Thank you. Next up, other than a possible AI partnership announcement, what other news could be expected before year end? And then further to that, could you just talk through the realistic milestones for the next 6 to 12 months? Sure
thing. Yeah, we're actually in active discussions about in-licensing programs, and so we expect to announce 1 or 2 of those before the end of the year. Some of these are again in the infectious disease space, so sits in our sweet spot. I think we have to be clever, though. We don't want to bring in something that we can't move forward ourselves. So we're going to be clever what we bring in and do our deep diligence on that. I think what we have a lot of internal news flow, you could say. We're manufacturing, for example, the POLB 001, there's GMP manufacturing required, there's formulation required. So we've got contracts in place, to move these along. So we're planning to be in humans, the first half of next year, so we're pushing along our timelines as quickly as we can. So in H1 next year to be testing that in humans. So there'll be a lot of these kind of, news flows coming. Potentially as well, as I say, as the in-licensing is exciting, the AI, next year we'll be talking about, let's say, the outputs from that, so there'll be a lot of that coming out. So I think, as I say, it's been a bit of a whirlwind from our few months being launched and public, but now we're gaining momentum. So between now and the end of the year, we're incredibly busy with news flow, and I think certainly 2022 will be a blowout year. There's just a lot going on, and we're all running very frantically to keep pace.
And quite a few questions are asked about close periods and lock-ins. Could you talk through the current situation on those, please?
Yeah, I think from the Open Orphan, let's say the shareholders who receive shares in Poolbeg, there was a 9-month lock-in. I mean, what we plan to do, and it should be said, a lot of the Open Orphan shareholders who bought in, they were, as Cathal describes them, as sticky. They do tend to kind of stay around, and they see the value will be coming. So I think that there is a 9-month lock-in, and again, it's kind of it's open to people then. But I think we expect to convince people by then that the value we haven't reached a peak of value. There's a lot of value over the coming months and years that we'll be building from our the work that's going on with regard to the lead program and with AI, and of course programs we bring in as well. So that's the timeline there. But as I say, we're in this for the long haul. There's a long way to go and a lot of value to be built.
And then a question about revenues and first revenues. Aside from in-licensing deals, are there any other sources of revenue?
It's interesting because we're going to be focused on therapeutics. We're actually in active discussions with some diagnostic companies. I mentioned this biomarker platform that we have, and that's kind of something we're talking to come back. And again, it goes back to the excellent work that hVIVO have done, where they identified, I mentioned biomarkers, these kind of proteins that are expressed very early in the disease cycle that have potential, you use these, you're going to identify patients that will develop severe influenza very early, so you can be aggressive when you treat them. So we're talking to diagnostic companies and prognostic companies about developing that further. So there could be income from that standpoint, to push that along. So that's one aspect. And I mentioned the non-dilutive funding, which, as I say, being an infectious disease right now, there's no better time. particularly as I mentioned, the US government are funding. And it's not just US companies. Obviously, these pandemics are global, as you know, so they're willing to fund science and entrepreneurs and biotech companies elsewhere. So we'll be looking for revenue from a grant standpoint as well. But they're the key points.